Hi there, welcome to lesson 3 of the Twilight Dreaming Quilt. This block is going to be the final block in the top row, and during this course we've actually covered so much. We've done our fusible machine applique with our zigzag or blanket stitching around the edge. We've done our quilting, our echo quilting, our free motion stars. We've done our crazy patchwork moon. So all techniques that you can use in your quilting journey and in your other quilts that you're making. So this week we're going to continue on with the applique. We've got another applique bird and we're going to do the paper piece tail. So anybody that's worried about that, I'm going to show you just how easy it is to do that. So let's get started. Okay, so you're going to print out your pattern sheets just like you have done every week, and then we're just going to start in exactly the same way. So we are taping our 4 pieces together to make the design placement, and then you're going to trace that onto your background fabric. You have your pattern pieces there, so you can cut those out with fusible web, and then just get them ironed onto your background square, and you can do your stitching around the edge. So either doing your zigzag or doing your blanket stitch. So here's our little tail, and just to tell you a little bit about that, what's going to happen is we're actually going to stitch it onto some paper like this, and then we're going to fuse that on using some fusible web, and then we're going to stitch around the edge to hold that in place. So just to show you how we're going to do that, this is our piece here. This is our pattern piece. So this is our foundation pieced tail pattern. And the first thing I'm going to get you to do is just to get your piece of fusible web ready. So I'm just taking a sheet of fusible web there like that, and then we're going to place that on top. And it does say here, and we're also going to have some instructions with this too. So you want to trace your fusible web on the broken line. So that's on the outer broken line first of all. So we'll get that traced first, and then we can set that aside just until we need that later on. Now the next thing that we're going to do is you need to cut out the pieces which we are going to use here for the tail. And so we've got written here what colours that you're going to use. So once again, you can use whatever colours you would like to use. And in our requirements list, we did say that you could cut the rectangles, so you can do that. So you can just cut that with a rotary cutter, or to make things easy, you can actually use some template plastic, pop that on, mark around the edge of it. So we've got the large rectangle, and then we've got the small rectangle there. And then you can just mark those onto your fabric and cut them out. So just showing here, what you would do is, here's my piece of fabric here, and I would just pop that on and then just mark around the edge of it like that. And then from there you could either cut that out with your rotary cutter or your scissors. We did have a really great question last week, and somebody was asking if you have your fabric, so you've got like a 25 centimeter or a 10-inch piece, a strip across the fabric, when you are cutting out your pieces, just kind of work everything along, from one side edge. If you have a fat quarter, so something say similar to this, work everything kind of across the bottom edge. So just keeping to one side there, because we will be in later blocks cutting some strips, and we will just be cutting strips that are about half the width of the fabric. So working on one side edge so that we're going to have some fabric left for cutting strips. So once you have your pieces cut out, we've got those there. The next step from there is to cut out this template piece here. So I'm just going to use some paper scissors, and I'm going to cut it out from the paper, and I'm cutting out on the broken line. So we will actually be stitching directly onto this paper. Okay, so that's our piece there. This is our tracing wheel or pattern roller, and what we're going to do with this is we are going to use a small ruler, and we are going to roll that over all of the lines. And the reason that we're going to do this is it's going to make lots of little holes along the lines, and what that does is it's going to make it visible for the shapes on the other side, and also we're going to be like folding back, so it's going to make it really easy to fold too. And we will be tearing the paper away from the fabric, and it also makes it easy to remove the paper. If you don't have a roller, what you can do is just unthread your machine, so don't have any thread in the top or in the bobbin, and you can just stitch over those lines. So that will do the same thing. Some of your new machines are a little bit too clever and they won't sew if there's no thread in the needle. That's what happens to mine, so that's why I like to use a pattern roller. Okay, so once we have that done, this is the way we're going to work it. We've got, on our first piece here, it's got piece A. It's a light pink, and there's line number 1. When you're doing this kind of work, one thing to remember is that this is actually the wrong side. The right side is actually going to be the back. So you're going to take your first piece of fabric and you're going to put it with the right side down onto your cutting mat or onto your table. So this is the wrong side here. You're then going to take your pattern piece and we're just going to line it up like that. So we're going to have this edge here, our first edge, and the bottom edge. Just make that level with the edges of the fabric. And then what we're going to do is, if you've got a flat pin, this is very handy, so you can actually just pop that flat pin in like that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to fold back on line number 1. So everything's in order. So we've got, that's our piece A, line number 1. So we're just going to fold back there like that, and then we're going to take our ruler, and using the flat pin, hopefully most of you will have a flat pin in your pin cushion somewhere. Using your flat pin, that's going to make that nice and easy for us to be able to cut that. So I'm just going to grab my rotary cutter, and we're going to trim our fabric 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the folded fabric. Okay, so flip it over like that, and then our next piece, actually, if we just sort of pop back over, you can see our next piece is going to be dark pink. So flip it over to the wrong side, take your dark pink, and we want to put that right sides together with our light pink piece, and then from there flip it back over to the other side. There's lots of flipping here, backwards and forwards. You can actually take your flat pin out, and then you can pop that pin in through both pieces. Now, if it does get a little bit skewy, like it just did for me there, just bring it back over again. Make sure that the pieces are nice and level there, like that. Flip it back over. Pop the pin in, so our pin is going through the paper and through our light pink and our dark pink. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to sew on line number 1. We're going to start from the bottom edge and we're going to sew from there, and we have to stop exactly where it meets this next line here. Okay, so I'm just going to head to the sewing machine now. Okay, so at the sewing machine we are going to thread up with a neutral coloured thread on the top and on the bottom, and then we're going to use a size 80 universal needle, and you want to have a really small stitch length, so say a stitch length of about 1.8. And the reason for that is that we're not going to be doing any reversing or tying off at the beginning or at the end. So your small stitch length is, less likely to come undone. And also it's just going to make it easier for us to be able to remove the paper away from the fabric. So let's get started with our sewing. So we're sewing on line 1 and we're sewing from the bottom to the top. I'm actually using my open toe foot, but you can just use your standard foot, but I'm using the open toe foot just to make it nice and easy for us to be able to see the line. So we're going to stitch exactly on that line. You can see when you put your pin in, make sure that it's far enough away from the line so that you can easily stitch, and then you'll take it out from the machine. I've got thread cutters, so I'm just going to cut my thread there, and then there's my foot. And now I'm just coming over here like this. I'm going to undo the pin, and then I'm going to flip my piece over there like that. So on the wrong side, I'm flipping my piece over. Next thing I'm going to do from there is I'm going to go back over to the front like that, and then I'm going to fold back on line 2. So as you can see, everything's in order. So line 2 is our next one. So I'm folding back on line 2. and then I'm going to, okay, so cutting 1/4 of an inch, so there's my 1/4 of an inch line there, and I'm just cutting like that. Okay, so then I'm bringing that back like that, so you can see what we've got there, and then coming back over to the front. So back over to the front, light purple is my next one. So we've done piece A, piece B, and light purple is my piece C. So I'm just going to grab that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip over to the back, and I'm going to just put my purple, my light purple, right sides together with my pink piece. Now, if you always line up your piece to start with the bottom edge of the tail, we know that it's always going to fit in. So I've kind of worked out these rectangles so that you shouldn't have any problems. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to put my pin in from the back, and I'm just going to put it in like that, so going through all of my pieces there and the paper, and just make sure that you've got it far enough from the stitching line where we're going to stitch there. Okay, so I'm going to flip that over, and because my pin's in there, I know that everything is lined up in the right place, and now we're going to sew. So stitching on the next line here, so line 2, and sewing all the way from the top, from the bottom of the tail to the top. And just, you always, with paper piecing, you just always get into the habit of always stopping where the line is. So I'm going to stop there and take that piece out. So I'm going to flip that back over. I'm going to remove the pin, and then as I open that up there, you can see our pattern, our design is already starting to form. So what you can do from there is we're going to trim that seam again. So we're going to flip it over, and then we're now going to fold back on line number 3. So folding that back there like that, and then we're going to get our ruler and our rotary cutter, and we're going to trim 1/4 of an inch away from the folded edge of the paper. Like that. Okay, so you can see that's looking really good. So let's just fold, let's flip over to the front. There's lots of flipping backwards and forwards here with this one. So we've got piece A, piece B, piece C. Now we're up to D, which is the our light purple, which is, so we're going to flip that over, and we're going to pop this piece on. So if you put that on there like that, so the thing is about this, you know that you're putting that there because once that flips over, it's going to fill that little triangle space there. So once again, I'm going to line it up so the bottom edge is level with the paper, and my edges are all lined up there, and then I'm going to pop my pin in there like that. There we go, and then we're going to flip it over, and we're going to stitch on line D. I'll line that up there, or line 3, sorry. This is why Laura and I, we always like to test our patterns all the time to make sure that by the time they get to you, all the little issues are ironed out. So we're going to stop sewing when it meets the next line, and then we're going to take it out. We're going over to the cutting mat here, taking our pin out, flipping that over there like that. Just give it a finger crease. If you like to go from the iron over to the iron, you can do that. I'm just going to finger crease this, and then we're going to flip it over, and our next line that we're going to fold on is going to be line 4. So we've got line 1, line 2, we just stitched on line 3, now we're going to fold over on line 4 like that, and then we're going to trim our seam 1/4 of an inch away from the folded edge of the fabric. Okay, so when we fold this out, you can see our pattern is starting to form, and then we'll just flip that back over to this side here, and so our next one is going to be our light aqua. So we'll flip it back over again, and then if we line up this piece here, so the bottom edge of your fabric is level with the bottom edge of the tail. I've actually got it upside down, but so the wider part of the tail I'm calling the bottom edge, and pop the pin in there like that. and then we're flipping it over and sewing. There is another way you could do this. You could pop that piece on and then you could flip it over and then pop the pin in, but I since have realized that it's much easier to put the pin in on that side there. Everything's staying together. And then we're coming over and we're going to sew on line 4. Paper piecing is probably the most accurate way to do patchwork. So we're stitching along from line 4, going from the bottom of the tail all the way up to the top, stopping when we get to the line and cutting our thread. And then we're going to flip that over. We're going to undo like that. And you can see we're covering, so you've got to make sure that you're covering the paper where you need to. And then we're going to flip back over again like that, and we're going to now fold on line number 5. So folding back, trimming the seam so that the seam is going to be 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the folded fabric. Now, if you get a little bit worried, I have done step-by-step photos of this one for you. So our next one is where we've got medium purple, but that's actually going to be our blue one. Popping that on like that. I like to turn it around so it's always facing the same way for you so you can understand. So lining up the edge of our fabric with the bottom edge of the tail there, which is the wider edge. Popping the pin in all layers. That, flipping over, and now we're stitching on line 5. So we just folded on line 5 and now we're going to stitch on line 5. Stopping where our other line meets, and then flipping over, taking the pin out, folding our piece out there. Once again, you can see our pattern starting to form, and then we're going to flip that over, and now we're up to line 6. So we're going to fold on line 6, and we're going to trim 1/4 of an inch away from the folded edge of the fabric. We're going to open that out. And we'll see our next one's going to be light green. So we're up to piece G, light green. So we're going to fold that over, flip it over, and then what we're going to do is get our light green piece, and we're going to put that so that it's going to be level with the bottom edge or the wider edge of the tail, and level with our piece that we just trimmed. Pop our pin in. If you don't have a flat head pin like this, you might have a pin that's got just a small sort of flat head to it, so it's not going to make a lump while you're trying to sew. Those pieces up, we're going to flip over, and now we're stitching on line 6. So we just folded on line 6, so now we're going to stitch on line 6. Cutting our thread, removing the pin, flipping it over like that. So you can see every time I flip over, I've got this worked out so that when you line this piece up with the bottom edge, you know that you can flip that over and the paper is going to be covered. So that's what we want to make sure. We want to make sure the paper's covered, and we also want to make sure, you can even hold it up to the light, you want to make sure that the light green is covering in that light green section there. Okay, so now we're up to line number 7. So we're going to fold back on line number 7. And we're going to trim 1/4 of an inch away from the folded edge of the paper. And then we're going to open that out like that. And our next colour is going to be our medium green. So we can see that's our piece that's going there. So we're going to flip that over, and we're going to pop that on, lining up our edge of our fabric with the bottom edge of the tail. We're going to take our pin, we're going to pin through all layers. Yeah, and then we're going to flip it over. And we folded on line 7, so now that's the line that we stitch on. so we're almost at the end now. I think we've got one more piece to do. So we're going to flip that piece over like that, and then we're going to go over to the front, and then we're going to fold back on line 8, and then our last piece is the light yellow. So folding back, trimming a 1/4 of an inch away from the folded edge of the fabric, giving us our 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, and then flipping over like this. We're going to go like that, and I just need my last piece of fabric, and I'm running that level so that it's going to be lined up at the bottom edge there. Popping my pin in, flipping it over, and we fold it back on line number 8, so we're going to stitch on line 8. Always make sure that your pin is not in the way of the seam. I don't want anybody breaking their needle because their pin's in the way. And as I said, you can always pop the pin in from the front if you want to. Okay, so flipping that over, taking that out, and then pressing that over. So it's starting to look like our bird's tail, but what we're going to do now, we're going to head over to the iron, we're going to give that a trim, and then we're going to move on to the next step. Okay, so over at the iron, we're going to give our foundation piecing a nice press, and then just a bit of a tip, if you press from the front, and if your iron does have a little bit of glue residue from our fusible web, it's probably going to leave some little black marks on the seam, so you might want to put some baking paper or some an applique mat over the top of it before you press it, but just pressing it from the wrong side that's quite safe to do. We're going to take our scissors and we're just going to finish cutting out, and we're going to cut on the outside edge of our paper at this point in time. So once we've cut that out, we're now going to remove the paper. So to remove the paper, very carefully, just tear away the paper from the seam. And you want to do that quite gently because you don't want to damage any of the stitches. When you get to the smaller pieces, sometimes you might find that you need the unpicker. So I've removed all the paper now from our bird tail. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take our fusible web piece that we traced out before, and I just want to make mention that we traced it on the broken line, but I also wanted you to trace on the solid line too. So we're going to pop that on like that, and we're going to iron that onto our tail. So we've got the rough side of the fusible web onto the wrong side of our bird's tail. Give that a good press. And then what we're going to do now is we're actually going to cut it out on the solid line. And the reason why I do this is because when you cut your fabric and fusible web at the same time, you've actually glued the fibers of the fabric, and it just means that you're not going to get a whole lot of fraying. So there's our bird tail there. Now what we're going to do from there is we're going to just remove the paper from the back. We can do our trick with the pin. We can score the paper like that, just so that we can gently tear that away. And then what happens from there is that you will then pretend that's not there. Then you're going to just iron that in place onto your block. So do use some baking paper or an applique mat so that we don't get any of the black marks onto our bird's tail there like that. And then once that's been ironed in place, just like I've done with this one here, I just did my little zigzag stitch around the edge of it. You could use your blanket stitch if you were doing that. I know that we do have different colours here, but what I did was, you know, Laura likes to design these pieces as if, you know, the moon is coming down onto it, and so I just used one of the lighter colours just to stitch around the outside edge of our tail there. Okay, so once we have finished that, the next step is to do the quilting. So we're going to once again layer it together with our batting and our backing, pop our safety pins in, And just the same thing that we've been doing every week, we're going to do our outline quilting. So using a colour thread that is the same colour as your background fabric. So just outline quilting. Like I mentioned before, we want to be able to kind of like stitch without stopping and starting. You can stitch over the top of a stitching line that you've already done. Once we've done our outline quilting, so nice and close to the edge of our applications, then from there we do our echo quilting, so that's 1/4 inch away from the edge. And then what I would do is I would thread up on the top with a light colour, just like we do with our crazy patchwork. I would probably use this same colour on the outside edge, and I know that I will have like a dark bobbin, but just reduce your top tension, and then you can just stitch in the ditch of our seams here, and that's going to give some texture to the tail there. Once we've done that, then we're going to mark our little crosses on and do our little stars there, so quilted with the lighter colour thread. So I've got a little bit more work to do on this block, so I'm going to continue sewing, and when that's done, then I'll be able to show you how the block looks finished with all of its quilting. Okay, so I've finished the quilting now, and as you can see here, I have done my stitching around the outside edge of all the shapes, sewing nice and close to the edge using a thread that matches my background fabric. I've done my echo quilt, so 1/4 inch away from the whole edge of the design. Like I said last week, if you can't judge that with your walking foot, just mark it in place. That's actually what I do. And I'm using a grey thread so that you can really see the echo quilting standing out. And then to finish off, I just make little crosses wherever I feel that the work looks a little bit puffy, and I just want to hold it down with some of our little twinkling stars like we showed you in week 1. So you can do that either free motion, or you can just stitch that backwards and forwards with your walking foot attached. Over here I've actually done a free motion stamen, so I've taken a bit of creative license from the pattern and I've made them a little bit bigger and curlier, and I've just done some little ones here. So don't forget, with our block, it is an 18-inch block. We're trimming back to 17 inches. Just try to keep your quilting about 1.5 inches away from the edge. That's just for us to be able to do our quilt as you go technique. So next, after this, I'm just going to go over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to show you a little bit more about free motion quilting. Okay, so over at my sewing machine here, I've got myself prepared a little quilt sandwich. So that's my top fabric, my batting, and my backing fabric. I've held it together with some safety pins, and I have just threaded up. I'm just using a grey Razant thread on the top and on the bottom, and I have attached my free motion foot. So free motion feet look something like this. Some of them are just like a little oval shape there, or you can get ones that are open in the front. That helps you to see where you're going, but just have a bit of a play with whichever one that you've actually got. It's normally the one that's got the spring on it. When you set up your sewing machine, you need to lower the feed dogs. That means that these are your feed dogs here. They're going to drop down, so that means that you are now in control of moving the fabric. So your feed dogs normally take the fabric through, but once they're dropped down, you are in control of moving the fabric around. Just have your stitch set onto just your normal straight stitch and whatever stitch length it comes up at, because the stitch length really doesn't matter, because you are now the one in control of determining the stitch length. So over at the sewing machine here, what we're going to do is, first of all, you want to bring your bobbin thread up to the top, and the way that you do that is, if you've got a needle down, needle up button, you press it once and then you press it again, and then it brings your bobbin thread up to the top. So there it is there, if you can see that. There we go. Then the next thing from there is that you drop the foot down. You always want to make sure that your foot is down. Sometimes with your free motion foot, you can't tell if your foot is up or down because it does have a little bit of a gap. What's going to happen is, just to make sure, if you pull on that top thread and it's quite firm, you know that the foot's down. If you pull on that thread and it's running through, the foot is in the up position. So it needs to be in the down position, and there needs to be tension on that thread, so you know that you're right to go. If you forget to put your foot down, what's going to happen is it's going to cause like a big mess of threads, big nest of threads on the underneath, because it's had no tension on it. Okay, so we're going to put our needle down. If you don't have your needle, a needle down button, that's okay. Just you turn the wheel on the side and you turn it towards yourself. Always turn the wheel towards yourself, though, so that the needle goes all the way down and all the way back up again, and that's when it will bring the thread with it. So first thing we're going to do is we just want to slightly move the fabric a little bit, just some small stitches, and once we're all connected there, our top and our bottom thread have connected, you can then just grab your scissors and trim that off there. So trim it off as close as you can at this point in time. You can always come back and trim a little bit closer. But the other reason why we bring the bobbin thread up to the top is to prevent it from getting tangled in with our stitching on the back of the quilt. Now, something else which is going to help you when you're doing your free motion work is some quilting gloves. So quilting gloves have actually got a rubber grip on the bottom of them, and what that does is that helps to grip onto the fabric, and it helps you to be able to maneuver it around. So you always get yourself sorted, bring the thread up to the top, do your first few stitches, and then you can pop the gloves on once you're ready to sew. You really can't do much when you've got the gloves on, so get all that done first. These gloves are a little bit big for me actually, but what you want to do is you want to create a hand frame like that. So see how I've got that square frame, and the first thing I get everyone to do when we're doing free motion work is just to sew backwards and forwards, just like this. Just up and down like that, just so that you can get used to moving your fabric underneath the needle. And you want your stitch length to look like it normally would do, say about a stitch length of 2.5. So just getting used to gliding backwards and forwards like that. So what you need to do also when you're doing that is to make sure that you're not all stressed and pushing down really hard. You're just gliding. So by gliding, that's what's going to help you get that nice stitch length like that. So that's what I get everyone to do practicing. Next thing I'll get you to do is try going sideways. So just working straight to begin with is a really great way to get into the swing of being able to do your free motion work. Once you have mastered going up and down and side to side, you can then easily stitch around the edge of a star. So I like to do this technique which I call Sketchy Applique, and that's where you sketch in the outline detail of your applique shapes, and then you can sketch in some inner detail on them. So once your pieces are fused down, I'm going to show how this works. Okay, so I'm just going to start in one little corner there like that, and I'm going to bring my needle down, and then I'm going to bring it up like that, and then it's brought the thread. Now, for people that have thread cutters, you're going to see that it's just going to bring up a tiny little bit of thread like that. And I'm showing this because I like to teach everybody on all different levels of sewing machine. So this is showing a technique if you do have a thread cutter. So just use some tweezers to bring the bobbin thread up. And then when we go to sew, have your needle down. Make sure that your foot is down like that. Just pop the threads behind, and then I'm making my little hand frame, and I'm just going to do my couple of stitches first of all. So you actually want to be aiming to sew about, it's a couple of millimeters away from the edge, so a bit less than 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric. And what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to work in small sections. I'm going to make my hand frame. If you wanted to put your gloves on, you would put them on at this point in time. I'll just remove those threads from the back. And the trick to Sketchy Applique is actually just moving in small sections. So I'm going to go up, back, and then up, and then I'm going to stop there with my needle in the down position. I'm going to pivot onto the next edge. This is something that I'm pretty sure anybody could do. Stop, and then I'm moving on to my next edge. So traditionally with free motion quilting, you would hold your work straight and keep, everything straight like this. But when you're doing this kind of technique, it is okay to pivot so that each edge when you go to sew it is actually straight in front of you. And you'll also notice that the stitches all don't have to be exactly on top of each other. It's just kind of a bit of a fun raw sort of technique to do. Okay, now once you have mastered just sewing straight like that, the next step is to start working into doing some little scallops. So let's get started with that. So we're going to do foot down. This time what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use my hand. I'm going to turn the wheel, go all the way down, and then when it comes back up like that, it brings my thread. So I've only got a tiny thread there because I'm using thread cutters, but I'm just going to pull that thread through like that, and then put my needle in the down position like that, and then I'm just going to practice doing some scallops. So a couple of stitches first of all. If you wanted to pop your gloves on, pop them on at this point in time once you've cut those threads. And some scallops. So I'll just give myself a little bit of space, and then I'm going to go like this. So always making sure that you're sewing away from your hands so that you're not going to end up stitching your fingers, so you have to be really careful. The other thing is that people tend to think that you have to work really fast when you're doing free motion work. You don't. It's just a medium pace with your sewing machine. And just making sure you're getting that nice stitch length like that. So once you have practiced doing lots of scallops like that, you could then draw up a little flower with some petals like that, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to sketchy applique around the edge of my petals. So needle down, whoops, foot down, bring the needle back up again. There's my little thread there. I'm just going to pull that through. So having some tweezers handy with you is a really good idea. Hanging on to those threads, needle down, make sure that your foot is down. My foot is actually already down at this point in time. And a couple of, I'm just going to do a couple of stitches to get started. Trim that. And making my hand frame, and we're just going to work one petal at a time. So we, with Sketchy Applique, I like to outline the shape 3 times, so that's why I'm going to go 1, 2, and 3, like that. Then I'm going to spin. Doesn't matter, the lines don't have to be exactly on top of each other all the time. You could actually just do this in fast motion now.
My feeling's really bad right now. I feel like I'm shaking all over the place.
No, you're going okay. And there's a cute little flower. So what I'm going to show now is basically just starting to get quite free with the work. We're going to do some loops and some curls, just having a play around. And then once I've done that, then I'm going to show you how I would do Sketchy Applique on a leaf. I've got my thread pulled up to the top. I'm going to do a couple of stitches just to get it caught together. And then I'm going to cut those threads. And I'm just going to have a play with doing some loops. Okay, so once you've had a little bit of a play, try doing a leaf. So I'll show you how we do that. There you go, and so that's a free motion sketchy applique leaf. So just a bit of fun that you can have a play around with over the weekend, and you never know where your skills, how they could grow and where it could take you. So thanks everyone, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed lesson 3.